parent level. And so if someone had copied and pasted values, the pivot table values into a spreadsheet, and you took that and wanted to like create another pivot table off of that, then you're going to get a data structure that looks like this, where you have a relatively complete table, but then there are missing values or empty cells in column A in this case, where there should be a cell, where there should be a value from like the row above or from a few rows above, depending on like how many rows need to be filled in. So how do we fill in all these empty cells like this without using keyboard shortcuts like I'm doing now? There are multiple ways of doing this, but in Google Sheets, the only way I can figure a way of doing this is by using Google Apps Script, which is a scripting language that's very similar to JavaScript to get to automatically do this for you without having to use keyboard shortcuts or anything. The script just runs and it looks at everything in column A and fills things down. So I'm actually going to, let's bring this thing over. I'm showing on the screen the script that you can use. Oh, this is actually the one for Microsoft Excel. Let's go back to the one for Google Sheets. This is a script you can use for Google Sheets. And the way I'm gonna, it's actually only, what is that, 14 rows of code. And the way you can insert in a script to your Google Sheet is normally you can go to tools, then macros and record macro. But what I'm going to do is go to tools, macros, import. And I'm going to, well, actually I already have a script here. Let me just delete this. Oh, this is already here. Let's assume we didn't have a macro here. You can, actually, let me see if I save this, if it'll get rid of that macro for me. So I want to start this from scratch. Let's refresh this. So I'm going to tools, macros. So I have no macros right here, but instead I can go to tools, script editor. And I have nothing in my macros.js script. Now I'm in Google Apps Script. This is a Google Apps Script connected to my Google Sheet, and I'm going to I'm going to copy and paste the script, put it into Google Apps Script, and here's what we can run. Well, first I'm going to press File Save, just to save this into my macros.js code file. And I can now go ahead and run this script, and let's see what happens. So if I go into Google Sheets and I go into tools, macros, you'll notice how I have this import option now because I have some script now in my Google Apps Script. I can click on import, and the import says I have this fillValuesDown macro, but it's just not added to my Google Sheet yet. I'm just going to click on add function. It's been added. Close this icon, the menu, go back to tools, macros, and now you can see I have this fillValuesDown macro. If I click on this, it's going to run, and now you can see my column A now has all the proper SPAC ticker symbols filled in those empty cells, which originally did not contain didn't contain any SPAC ticker symbol. So that's what this script does. I'm just going to undo that. And let's kind of walk through what this script does line by line, because it's actually a pretty simple script. And I think it's worth kind of learning about how Google Apps Script work and how you can really do some really powerful things with Google Apps Script. So the first thing we do in line one of the script is we just call a function. It's called function fillValuesDown. And I'm just going to zoom out a little bit. And fillValuesDown is just the name of the macro. That's what it just simply the name of the macro, and you can use that name when you call the macro in your Google Sheet. The next line, row 2, is var spreadsheet equals spreadsheet app.getActive. All that does is it looks at the spreadsheet app as like a special object in the Google Sheets API, and spreadsheet app basically lets you access different attributes of the spreadsheets application, and .getActive simply just gives you the active spreadsheet in your Google Sheet. And in this case, it's just going to be SPAC data, which is right here. Now if we go to the row 3, var current range, this is probably the most advanced variable probably. Excuse me. Var current range equals spreadsheet.getRange, left parentheses, double quote, A2 colon A double quote, plus spreadsheet.get last row, left parentheses, right parentheses, right parentheses. Now what does this line do? So let's just ignore var current range for now. Spreadsheet is the name of the variable we have in row 2, which is var spreadsheet. So we are basically referencing the active spreadsheet by using this variable name. Now dot get range, that simply pulls in the range of cells that you can select in the Google Sheet. So in this case, we are saying we want everything from A2, which is starting with right below the row header in Google Sheets. We're looking at row 2, which is HZAC, colon A double quote. And the reason why we don't finish the cell reference, we could do A2 colon A100 or whatever, but we want to know exactly when the last row appears on our Google Sheet. And in that case, we can use this get last row function, and that returns us the last row that has any data in our Google Sheet. And in this case, it's going to be row 18. And so this will give us A2 plus A2 colon A18, because we're putting in this variable, which is, well, not a variable, but it's like we're referencing the active spreadsheet, getting the last row, and then this reference becomes A2 colon A18 for our Google Sheet. And then we set this range equal to current range. So var current range, this variable current range contains our everything from A2 to A18, which is column A with all our SPAC ticker symbols, which also, that if you recall, that column contains empty cells. Then we have this new range, var new range in row 4, line 4, equal to just a empty array. We'll use that later. And then we have an empty variable called var new fill value, which will come into play later on in this loop. So we have 4 variables defined. That's all you need for this script to work. You could probably simplify this down even more, but for now I thought this was simple enough. Now row 6, this is where things get a little spicy. So we have current range, which is, if you recall, A2 to colon A18. Get values, what does that do? That just gets every single value from our range. So we'll have basically this range of values where we have A2 to A18. So you're going to have an array of ticker symbols, but also in that array, you're going to have ticker symbol plus empty values, because we have cells with empty values in that range. So you're going to see, in this array, you're going to see a bunch of ticker symbols, but interspersed in those ticker symbols, there's going to be empty cells here, 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 so on and so forth. So get value simply just pulls all the values from the range you selected, and then this dot map function value. What this does is we're going to now loop through every single value that's returned from this get values function. And then as we loop through each value, that value gets put into this value variable when we say map left parentheses function, left parentheses value, right parentheses. And then everything within this left bracket and right bracket, these are things, this is the code that will run for every single value in our array. So we have 17 values in our array in this case, because our Google Sheet has 17 rows of data. So what we do now from this point is, on line 7, we do an if-then conditional statement. So if value, and the reason why we have to do this value left bracket 0 right bracket is because the way Google Sheets data is structured, and most of your time when you're struggling with using the API or Google Apps Script, is really trying to figure out how to access the data structure. So in Google Sheets, the data is stored in a 2D array. I'm not going to go into what that means, but essentially you have to reference the first object, the first parameter from the value value in order to access the actual value in that cell. So we're basically saying if the value in if the value does not equal in blank, so we're basically saying that if it does contain a ticker symbol, set the new fill value variable to that value. So in this case, our first ticker symbol is HZAC. So now new fill value will now contain the result of value left bracket 0 right bracket, which is HZAC. So new fill value now contains this, basically HZAC, like that. And then what we do is we do new range, which is this. On line 4, we had declared this array. We say new range push. Push just adds values to an array. And we say push new fill value. And recall, new fill value just contains the value of our ticker symbol. And the reason we have to put this in a bracket, again, is because Google Sheets needs to have a 2D array of values. So essentially, it has to be an array of arrays. And so we're basically creating an array of one value by putting new fill value in an array, and then we're pushing that array into this like outer array called new range. So new range dot push left parentheses left bracket new fill value right bracket right parentheses, and that's basically it for the first if statement. So we're basically checking if the value contains a ticker symbol, then we run this code, which is set new fill value to the ticker symbol, and then new range. The new range array gets that ticker symbol added to it as an array. So what happens if there's an empty cell? That's what this else is for. And the else will simply push the new fill value as well into the range. And the reason why this works is because if you think about it, back in our Google Sheets, we have HZAC, which is our ticker symbol, which contains a value, but then cell A3 is blank, and we want that cell to contain HZAC. If you go back to the script, at this point in the loop, we're going to be going to the else branch because there's no value in that empty cell. So then new range gets pushed the new fill value, and what's new fill value? It's still new fill value still contains the first value, which is HZAC. So new range.push now contains two values. The first value was added. New range was first. The HZAC was first added to new range in the first iteration of the loop. So the first position in the array now contains HZAC. The second time the loop runs, new range also gets a new fill value, which is also HZAC. So right now our array looks like this, which is left bracket, HZAC, right bracket, comma, left bracket, HZAC, right bracket, like that. So we have two values in our new range array. Basically, each value is HZAC. And then that finishes the second time. Now the third time it runs, it's going to see this FST ticker symbol. So now there's a non-empty ticker symbol. And what happens when this script runs again in this loop is it says that value, the current value is FST, so it's not blank. Now it's going to go through this branch of the if then statement. And then guess what? New fill value gets set to equal FST. And then new range gets pushed that FST value. And then every subsequent empty cell below FST goes into this else branch. And guess what? New fill value now contains FST. So FST will now get added to the new range array. So we're basically creating this array called new range that will contain all the values, like kind of filled in, double quote, that the range should have. And at the very, very end, the last line of the script, current range.set values, it basically takes this range, the new range array that we've been populating with all the correct ticker symbols, and basically sets that range equal to that array. So now we have an array that kind of looks like this. So we have HZAC, comma, I'm just going to do the first few options here, comma, and this is going to be FST, comma, FST. So our array is going to start looking like this, where we have this array of values all filled in. And then what we do is we set this array of values into the current range. And recall our current range is set up here, which is everything from A2 to A18. So again, if we can run the script from Google Sheets, or we can run it from here from Google Apps Script by pressing this play button. And make sure fill values is selected. And then you're going to see these values automatically filled in. Now it's very tempting to do something like this. Now this is what I used to do when I first started using started using macros rather, is you go to Tools, Macros, Record Macro, and what you can do here, I'm just going to hide that. You use your keyboard and actually select stuff with the keyboard like this. I can fill this formula down, and you think that, okay, I can do a few iterations of this, hit save. I can call this fill test. You're essentially logging keyboard strokes into the macro, but then when you actually look at what the macro, what the code for that macro, what it looks like, this is down here, you can see you have things like getRange.activate, and then get current cell, get selection, get next data range, activate. These are all functions that exist in the Google Sheets API that let you actually like select things and fill formula down and essentially do things that you would normally do in Excel. But the problem is that this is very inefficient when it comes to doing if you have a million rows where you have to do this, fill this formula down, this actually ends up becoming very resource intensive and slow compared to using this, where you're actually just using objects behind the scenes. I think if you're just starting off using macros, like this type of, where you're logging keyboard shortcuts and looking at the pattern of how things are selected with the cursor, and then like how you're selecting data ranges and stuff, that's good as a level 1, because you can actually see how the cursor is moving around the Excel file. But once you get to level 2, like you're an advanced macro user, you're probably going to want to do something like this, because this doesn't actually get into the application of Google Sheets and moving your cursor around and like selecting ranges and activating stuff, because that ends up being, I mean, think about it, like every time the script runs, it's going into Google Sheets and like physically, well, virtually selecting stuff on the Google Sheet, whereas this script is a lot more performant because you're just taking data from the data model behind the scenes, and you're only really using the spreadsheet like features at the very end when you say current range, that's set values, new range. This is also kind of hard to read, to be honest. Like you really have to simplify this down to make it look easy, but this is how I used to do macros originally, but then I found out that doing macros like this was very slow, especially in Excel. So yeah, not as good of an experience. So that's the script for Google Sheets. I know a lot of you folks are still using Excel out there, so I did write a quick version for Excel. I'm going to drag this over here. This is the version in Excel. I'm just going to zoom in. You can see we have the same exact data. Actually, let me actually copy this so I can put it into the spreadsheet, and so it looks the same. Okay, so this is, you should see the Excel file here. And we have the exact same data. This shouldn't be here. And we have empty cells in column A. And if I go to developer and then go to macros, I already put in the macro here. I know it's kind of hard to say. I can't zoom in onto the macro, but I also have a link to the macro here in Google Sheets. It's very similar, but there's a lot of like extra vocabulary you have to get used to, and I honestly don't like VBA as much anymore now that there's Google Apps Script, because Google Apps Script looks and feels like JavaScript, and JavaScript is a lot more universal when it comes to using other applications outside of Google Sheets and spreadsheets. So, but this is still, you can still do, this is more reminiscent of like yeah, this is basically Visual Basic, and some of these things requires you to go into the Excel file and like select things, which I don't like, but it works. So if you go back to the Excel file, let's go drag this out, and if I go to macros, fill values down, run, it would just do the same thing as the Google Sheets script. So that is the script you can use. I know this is probably going to be focused on a very specific use case, but I do come across this a lot when I was an analyst, so I thought this might be a useful script for folks to see. And let me know if you have any questions in the show notes or show comments. All right, in the second part of this episode, I wanted to talk about one other episode from a podcast I recently just started listening to. It's a relatively new podcast, but it's from HeavyBit, which I really enjoy. HeavyBit is like this. They're kind of like they're like an accelerator / investment fund, and they invest in a lot of developers.